Samburu Reserve. Late morning. A lion lies collapsed in the sand, his body curled in on itself, ribs rising through the fur like brittle fences. His flank barely lifts with breath. There are flies gathering along the corners of his mouth. One paw twitches slightly, not from strength, but from something involuntary, like a thread pulled loose. The ground beneath him is hard and cracked, heat pushing up from the earth. He does not move when the truck stops. He does not lift his head. He is still alive, but only just. Jonah steps out first. He is the oldest among the small team of rangers and has seen what the end looks like. Still, he doesn't speak right away. He crouches low, just a few meters from the lion, watching the slow rise and fall of the rib cage. There is no blood, no wounds, just hollowing, the kind of wasting that takes weeks, the kind that leaves nothing left to fight with. The others stay behind, not from fear, but from knowing too well what it looks like when help arrives too late. Jonah removes his hat and places it on the ground beside him. A small movement. Quiet, deliberate. Then he shifts slightly closer. The lion's ear does not flick. His eyes remain shut. From this distance, the smell is stronger now. Old fur, sweat dried in the sun, the faint smell of decay beneath the tail. Flies move in and out of his nose. There is no sound but the wind moving dry acacia leaves overhead. Still breathing, Jonah says, almost to himself. One of the younger rangers steps forward with a water pouch, hesitates, then kneels beside Jonah. Together they watch for any sign the lion registers them. None comes. His body remains limp, his chest rising faintly and falling even fainter. No growl, no twitch of warning, no awareness. It is not trust, it is absence. They wet a cloth and press it gently near the lion's mouth. Some of the moisture slides along his lips, darkening the fur. But he does not lick it. One drop reaches the corner of his mouth and stays there. Jonah signals for the stretcher. The men hesitate. This weight, once proud and dangerous, now barely stirs. But lifting him could finish what Starvation has started. If they wait too long, the heat will do the rest. If they move too quickly, his body may not hold. They bring the canvas stretcher forward slowly. Two men hold the sides. Jonah slides his hands beneath the lion's front legs, palms flat against the wiry chest. He nods once. They lift as one. The lion's head lolls to the side, mouth parting just slightly, tongue slack. No resistance, no noise. Just the dull, dry sound of ribs against canvas. They place him in the back of the truck, legs tucked awkwardly beneath him. The wind shifts, carrying a breath of dust over the valley rim. Jonah kneels once more beside him and checks for movement. The breath is still there, barely, but there. His hand rests gently on the lion's shoulder, feeling the fragility of the muscle beneath. "Hold on," he murmurs. No one else speaks. The others close the tailgate and secure the straps loosely. They do not use chains or sedation. There is no strength left to fight. The truck starts, kicking up a trail of ochre dust as it pulls from the riverbed road. Inside the truck bed, the lion does not stir. His paws are curled slightly inward, the pads cracked and pale. His fur, once likely gold, is now coated in the dull gray of drought. But the eye, one eye, flutters, just once, barely visible beneath the lashes. It closes again. Nothing more. The men do not notice it. But Jonah keeps looking. They drive in silence for several kilometers, passing dry gullies, scattered trees, the sun pressing harder as the road winds north. There is no noise from the truck bed. At one turn, the vehicle bumps slightly over a rock. Jonah glances back. The lion shifts by, no more than a breath. If they reach the compound in time, fluids might stabilize him. If not, this ride will be his last. There is no guessing anymore. He will either hold on or fade. But he is not gone yet. That much is clear. For now, that's enough to keep the truck moving. The dust swirls behind them, settling gently back over the paw prints in the sand. The truck moved slowly across the rutted path, its tires pressing deep into the dry, red soil. Inside the bed, the lion remained crumpled on his side, his limbs tucked awkwardly, eyes shut. The canvas beneath him was damp where water had spilled earlier, soaking into his flank. His ribs rose and fell, uneven but constant. Each breath came thin, like it had to find its way past something heavier. The sun had shifted high overhead now, and heat shimmered around the edges of the vehicle as the land rolled by in waves of thornbrush and dust. Jonah sat in the rear compartment, half-turned, eyes fixed on the lion. Every time the truck jolted, he watched for the worst. But the lion didn't flinch. He didn't brace or stiffen. His body simply absorbed it. There was no resistance. But his chest still moved, shallow and slow, just enough to prove that something inside him hadn't let go. Not yet. A ranger called Kambe drove with both hands steady, avoiding rocks and inclines. He didn't ask questions. He didn't speak. Inside the cab, the silence was heavy with calculation. They were still 30 minutes from the northern post, the only station with fluids and a shaded pen. They had made the call just after loading him. Attempt the transfer, or lose him where he lay. Either option came with risk, but this one carried motion. Motion was something. The lion's tail had fallen over the side of the stretcher earlier, limp and dusted with dry soil. Jonah reached forward and tucked it gently beside the hind leg. The fur was brittle near the end, too thin for his age. There was no blood anywhere. No wound, just a slow fading. Like he'd stopped eating days ago and the desert had done the rest. Jonah placed a hand on the lion's shoulder. No pressure, just presence. The bone beneath felt sharp and foreign, like something misplaced under skin. "Keep going," he said quietly. The road narrowed as they passed through a grove of lean acacia trees. Branches scraped lightly along the sides of the truck. Still no movement from the lion. No ear twitch. No breath catch. Only the same rhythm, fragile and distant. Jonah tilted the water pouch again and let a small stream trickle onto the cloth. He dabbed the lion's mouth, careful not to open it. Moisture gathered at the corner, just as before. The lion's tongue remained hidden, unmoved. But one nostril twitched. Brief as a blink. Jonah saw it. It was not much, but it was there. If his lungs fail before they reach the post, there will be nothing to restart. If his heart slows more, they won't notice until it stops. But if he keeps this rhythm, even weakly, the field station has a chance to hold him in place. For now, every mile is a gamble they're still winning. The engine whined softly as the incline rose. Kambe shifted gears and the truck groaned as it climbed. Dust poured off the tires in a pale curtain. One bump sent the stretcher shifting slightly. Jonah steadied it with both hands. The lion's body rolled just a fraction toward him. The jaw slackened. A thin trail of drool followed the line of his chin. "Almost there," Jonah whispered. No response, but the ribs moved again, just slightly faster this time. Not panic, just survival flickering at the edge. The wind shifted, blowing the scent of dry dung and sun-warmed thornbark through the cabin. Birds flickered through the branches overhead. A squirrel darted across the road and vanished into scrub. The world around them kept moving. But inside the truck, everything narrowed to the small rise and fall beneath a lion's ribs. As they crested the final hill, the wire fence of the post came into view, sun-bleached and leaning slightly. One ranger stood waiting at the gate with gloves in hand and a shaded stretcher pad prepped under the tree. Jonah exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. They weren't safe yet. Not by a long stretch, but they'd made it past the quiet stretch of land where dying often goes unseen. The lion hadn't moved, hadn't opened his eyes, hadn't lifted his head, but his breath still lingered, and in a place like this, that alone was reason to keep going. The truck rolled on. tires cracking the dry earth as the gate creaked open into the compound. The stretcher was eased onto a shaded pad beneath the outer canopy of the Samburu field station. The lion didn't react. His weight settled like a dropped cloth, limbs folded loosely, head tilted just enough for gravity to guide the fluids that now ran slowly from a line above him. Jonah and 2 others worked in silence, checking pulse at the rear leg, watching the ribs, wiping away flies. The air was still, warm, and silent. There were no roars, no sounds of warning or protest, only the slow hum of insects and the soft drip of water into the ground. They kept his body cool, using damp cloths and slow fanning, but the lion never shifted. His eyes stayed closed. Even when the scent of raw meat was brought near, laid just a few inches from his nose, he gave no sign he noticed. The food remained untouched, its color darkening in the sun as the afternoon passed. It was too soon to force anything. His body was still in preservation mode. Any effort could tilt the balance away from recovery. If he ate, it would be on his own time. But if he continued to refuse, that time would eventually run out. Jonah remained nearby, seated cross-legged on the ground with a small notebook in hand. He didn't write in it, he just kept it there. A habit more than anything. He watched the lion's chest rise and fall, measured it, counted, then watched again. The breathing stayed irregular. Long pauses, then a gasp, then stillness. But always one more breath. Just one. Kambe stepped quietly behind him and set down a shallow bowl of water. "Still nothing?" he asked. Jonah shook his head. "Not yet." That was all they said. The stakes had already been spoken aloud hours earlier. If he doesn't eat soon, he won't have the strength to process fluids. If he loses the drive to lick, to chew, to move even his jaw, he won't last another night. Fluids could stretch the hours, but not forever. The meat had to matter eventually. A soft breeze moved through the nearby branches. Dust swirled at the edge of the enclosure, catching in the creases around the lion's eyes. One ear flicked once, then returned to stillness. His paws were curled tightly inward, claws just barely exposed. The pads were worn thin, pale with disuse. The muscles along his shoulders had atrophied, no longer capable of lifting his weight. When Jonah gently touched the joint beneath his jaw, it was loose, yielding, not broken, just empty of tension. They changed the fluid bag just before dusk. The lion's tongue had begun to show small signs of moisture return. It curled slightly at the edge but did not extend. He swallowed twice in the span of 10 minutes, reflexive, not conscious, but a swallow meant that his body was registering something. It meant his throat hadn't closed off entirely. Still, no interest in the food. Jonah leaned in and spoke gently. "Come on, just a little." The lion gave no answer. But his breathing stayed, a fragile thread in the air, the kind of rhythm that doesn't comfort, but doesn't break either. Each time the wind picked up, Jonah watched for a response. A head turn, a nostril flare, an eye opening. None came, but each time the chest moved, however faintly, it was enough to keep them there. Night came soft and slow. The sun dropped behind the thorn trees, and the insects rose in chorus. Still no movement. The meat was pulled away, replaced with a fresh strip in the early moonlight. The compound went quiet. Only 2 rangers remained awake, taking turns beside the enclosure. One wrote in the log every hour, the other watched the lion's ribs. He had not moved, he had not roared, but the air remained marked by the presence of breath. And for that night, it was enough. In the distance, hyenas called into the darkness, high, sharp, and constant. But the lion did not respond. He didn't lift his head, he didn't show his teeth, he simply breathed. That was all he could do, and it was still something. By morning, the light had thinned into a pale sheet across the compound floor. The air was cooler than usual. quiet except for the slow buzz of insects warming to the day. The lion hadn't moved. His position was nearly identical to the night before. Limbs folded close, body collapsed toward one side, ribs faint beneath the skin. The only change was the layer of fine dust that had settled overnight across his fur, catching in the creases near his mouth and the short curve of his whiskers. He looked like part of the earth now, as if the land had drawn him back in piece by piece. Jonah sat beside him again. He had taken 2 short breaks through the night, trading places with the others, but his place was always the same. Near the lion's head, within reach, never imposing. The fresh meat had been left untouched. The fluid bag had been changed twice. Nothing inside the lion's body had turned yet. No hunger, no motion, no signal. But something still held the breath steady. He soaked a cloth in cool water and reached forward. His hand moved slowly, not to wake or challenge, just to ease the weight gathering on the lion's face. Gently, he brushed the dirt from around the eyes, wiped along the jaw, then paused at the whiskers. There was no sound, no shift. He moved to clear a smear of dried saliva from the corner of the mouth, and in that pause, something opened. The lion's left eye, thin and filmy, cracked open just enough to show the line of a pupil. It didn't focus, it didn't lock on, but it opened. Jonah froze. He said nothing. The eye remained open for only a few seconds, then shut again, the lid dragging slowly downward like it was too heavy to resist gravity. But it had opened, and it was the first movement that wasn't breath. He reached for the small logbook beside him and made a note. Not for the report, not for protocol, just to mark the exact time. One eye open, brief, no other movement. Reflex, but voluntary. He looked back at the lion. The rest of the body remained still. But that small shift had changed something. The threshold had moved. Breath alone had carried him through the last 2 days. But now there was sight, even if only once. The younger ranger, Ayub, approached from the side gate with new rations and paused when he saw Jonah crouched lower than usual. "Something happen?" he asked quietly. Jonah nodded. He looked. Ayub didn't ask what that meant. He set the food down beside the fence and stepped back. The field around them shimmered gently with heat, even in the early hours. Birds gathered along the far posts, quiet for once. The lion gave no more signs. His breathing remained slow, shallow. But Jonah could tell the difference. There was something behind it now. Not strength, not awareness, just a reflex that came from somewhere inside the body still trying to hold on. They brought the meat closer again. This time, Jonah placed a strip near the front paw rather than the mouth. The lion didn't reach for it, but his nostrils flared slightly. The change was brief and might have been missed by anyone else, but Jonah saw it. He stayed beside him for another hour, watching as the wind moved soft dust across the enclosure floor and settled gently over the lion's back. When a beetle crawled past his ear, the lion didn't twitch, but when a fly landed on his nose, the skin rippled just once before stilling again. These were not recoveries, not yet, but they were not endings either. They would wait again. They would keep offering, keep wiping the dust from his face, keep sitting with him through the heat. The stakes had not changed. If he failed to respond more in the next 24 hours, he might not recover. But if something inside him had chosen to open one eye, then something inside him had not yet given up. The sun crept higher, and the shadows from the acacia branches shifted across the sand. Jonah rested one hand lightly on the lion's side, fingers barely pressing against the fur. The wind lifted and carried a line of dust through the mesh. It passed over the lion's shoulder and settled quietly into the curve of his whiskers. By the time dusk settled over the compound, the heat had finally begun to lift. The dry crust of the day cracked open into silence, and the trees stood still against a cooling sky. Inside the pen, the lion had not moved. His body, though wiped clean and turned slightly earlier for circulation, had remained slack and quiet. The meat beside his paw had dried into stiffness. The water bowl was untouched. The evening team took their places without a word. A few notes were marked in the log. Breathing shallow, pulse faint, no feeding response. Eyes closed. Same as before. Jonah returned just after nightfall, walking slow along the outer path. He carried a folded cloth, a new fluid line, and the same tired patience he had brought each night. A small lamp on the post cast a weak ring of yellow across the lion's side. His chest still rose, barely, but something was different now. The compound had quieted earlier than usual. No vehicle noise, no chatter, only the soft weight of night pressing in around the edges. Even the birds had gone. Jonah crouched down and reached gently to adjust the lion's hind leg, which had begun to cramp. The muscle twitched slightly beneath his hand. Not a reflex, not resistance, just the body remembering how to respond. He paused, letting the touch settle, then slowly replaced the IV bag, lifting the line to keep flow steady. The lion did not flinch, but as Jonah leaned back, a long, distant call echoed from beyond the fence line. A hyena, or two, maybe three, somewhere beyond the dry ridge to the west. Their voices cracked across the night like glass breaking in slow motion. A warble, then a sharp pitch. It was not unusual for hyenas to call near the compound. The rangers heard them most nights, but what happened next was not routine. The lion's left ear moved. It didn't lift fully or swivel with force. It simply turned slightly toward the sound, a small arc, subtle and slow. The kind of motion that might go unnoticed unless someone had been watching for hours, waiting for anything. Jonah saw it clearly. The skin at the base of the ear rippled. The ear turned, then stilled again. He sat back slightly, watching. There was no further motion. The rest of the lion's body stayed limp, the breathing unchanged. But something inside him had listened. For the first time since collapse, his body had acknowledged the outside world. Not by sight, not by movement, just by sound. His instincts had stirred. Somewhere deep in the exhaustion, in that old part of him, wired for survival, had flickered back into place. The moment passed. The hyenas cried again, then faded into distance. The lion's ears settled. No other part of him stirred. Jonah said nothing, but he marked it down. Small ear flick westward. Response to hyena call. First physical reflex not caused by touch. That was all it took, a tiny line, but it changed everything. If the lion could still hear, he could still process. If he could still process, something in his brain was holding ground. The risk remained as sharp as ever. Without food, his organs would continue to fail. Without mobility, circulation would suffer. But now, they knew he wasn't just surviving in isolation. He was still tied, however faintly, to the world around him. Jonah remained beside him through most of the night. He refilled the water, changed the damp cloths, watched the shadows stretch across the lion's side with every pass of moonlight. No other movement came. But he didn't need more. Not yet. The body could rest. The instinct to listen had returned. Just before dawn, the wind moved gently through the outer trees. A loose piece of bark scraped against the fence post. Somewhere beyond the brush, a reed buck stamped once in the grass. Inside the pen, the lion lay still, one ear pressed back toward the earth, the other facing the open dark. The air stayed cool longer than expected that morning. A thin cloud cover stretched over the reserve, softening the light and dulling the heat that usually rose early. Inside the enclosure, the lion hadn't changed position. His legs were still drawn in, spine curled lightly to one side, tail pressed against the dirt. But his breathing had steadied. Still shallow, still slow, but no longer stuttering in the middle of each rise. It moved like something practiced now, not something borrowed. Jonah stepped quietly onto the sand, carrying a fresh strip of liver folded in gauze. They had been cutting it smaller each day, testing for scent response, for recognition. None had come yet. But the last ear flick, the turning toward sound, it was enough to try again. This time he knelt lower, placing the liver not at the paw or beside the bowl, but close to the lion's mouth. Not touching, just near enough for the smell to reach the nostrils if the wind shifted. Then he backed away. He took his place on the bench just outside the gate and waited. The hours passed without notice. The field station moved around them at its usual pace. Tools clinked in the sheds, boots pressed into gravel, and water drums were refilled from the tank. Occasionally a soft word was passed between rangers, but most of the morning stayed quiet. Inside the pen, the lion remained unmoved. The liver sat untouched. Jonah kept his eyes low, his focus steady. By noon, the light returned sharp through the thinning cloud. Flies gathered near the meat, shifting restlessly but never landing for long. Dust crept under the gate. Still no motion. Jonah refilled the fluid line and wiped down the lion's back, checking gently for heat sores or signs of swelling. The skin remained loose, warm but not fevered. He adjusted the cloth near the neck and stepped back again. Another hour passed. When Jonah returned for the afternoon check, he knelt as usual, eyes steady on the lion's face. Then he paused. The liver was gone. It hadn't been dragged. There were no marks in the dirt, no shift in the paw, no scattering of flies. The sand was undisturbed, but the meat was missing. He leaned in, slowly, checking for signs. That's when he saw it. A faint line of moisture traced the edge of the lion's bottom jaw. Not from the fluids, not from the pouch. It curved toward the corner of his mouth, the place where instinct meets will. Just a trace, thin as a breath. But it hadn't been there before. Jonah stayed still, watching for any flicker of confirmation. The lion didn't move. His eyes stayed closed, but one nostril twitched slightly and his tongue lifted, barely, then settled again. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't strength. It was something smaller, older, a reflex turning into choice. After so many days without food, even a fragment taken voluntarily meant the body was trying to re-engage. The risk was still clear. He hadn't lifted his head, hadn't shown real swallow response, but something had shifted, and that meant time had bought them something real. Jonah stood and walked toward the shed slowly, signaling to Ayub without speaking. He didn't need to explain. The look alone said enough. They would log the missing meat, the moisture, the nostril shift. They would try again in a few hours with smaller pieces, placed one at a time. There would be no celebration, no false confidence. But this was a threshold crossed. Late in the day, a breeze moved through the trees beyond the fence. Loose bark clattered gently against the metal post. The sun dropped lower, casting pale orange across the lion's fur, warming the space where his jaw had moved just slightly. His body remained still. But somewhere inside, a signal had fired, not to fight, not to rise, just to receive. And when the last shadow crossed his side, it paused for a moment at the mouth, where breath and decision now shared the same space. The next morning, the sand near the compound gate told a story none of the rangers expected. Just beyond the tire lines, beside the dry thorns where brush grew thick, a new set of tracks appeared in the dust. Large, well-formed, and fresh. They curved inward, not in passing, but in pause. 4 prints, heavy and deliberate, all pointed toward the eastern side of the enclosure. Then they turned away, vanishing into the thick brush along the ridge. Jonah crouched beside them without speaking. The edges were clean. No wind had dulled their shape. These had been left sometime after midnight. Too large for a hyena, too round for a leopard. He followed them slowly along the fence, where they reappeared briefly, closer to the shaded wall of the lion's pen. She had come close, closer than any wild predator had dared in weeks. And then she had left. By noon, the tracks had dried at their edges, and the wind began to lift loose dust across the trail. The others had seen them too. No one rushed to conclusions. But something hung in the air that day, a stillness even the birds respected. Inside the pen, the lion remained quiet, but he had swallowed again that morning. Another piece of liver had disappeared during the night, this time without a trace left behind. As the afternoon waned, Ayub moved to the ridge with binoculars, scanning the tree line that bordered the far edge of the compound. Just before the light dipped too low, he saw her, a lioness, alone, sitting just past the brush line, not crouched, not hiding. Sitting upright, her body angled slightly east, her head turned toward the field station wall. She did not move, she did not call, she only watched. He alerted Jonah quietly, who stepped forward without speaking. They knew better than to disturb her. She wasn't hunting. Her posture said nothing of fear or caution. She had come for something else. They watched her for 10 minutes, then 20. She didn't blink. When the sun fell fully behind the ridge, she stood and slipped back into the trees, the brush swallowing her without sound. That night, the rangers took turns keeping watch in quiet rotation. No one approached the tree line. They just listened. The wind passed softly through the compound, carrying dry leaves against the fence. Somewhere, a jackal barked twice, then fell silent. But no footsteps, no growls, no second arrival, just the steady silence between movements. The next morning, the tracks were back. This time, closer. One near the water drum. One near the shaded gate where the ranger entered with food. Again, she hadn't broken the fence line. Again, she had turned back before dawn. Jonah checked the ground near the lion's pen carefully. No sign of contact. But the lion had licked the meat clean this time, not just taken it, but left no trace. The bowl beside his flank had been moved slightly, its edge buried deeper into the soil. Whatever instinct she was following, it was not random. Every night she returned. She never approached the pen directly, never tested the wire, never called out. But she always came to the same place, and she always left before sunrise. The lion inside the pen did not respond to her presence. No shift in the ears, no change in breath, no motion toward the sound. But her timing was precise, and her gaze was fixed. Whether they had crossed paths before, no one could say. It wasn't unusual for lions to separate and return, for siblings or former mates to drift through overlapping ranges. What was unusual was this: a lioness, appearing without fear, watching without sound, and waiting for something she never touched. On the fourth evening, the wind rose early, sweeping dry grass across the low hills. The rangers stood back, letting the quiet settle in. Far off, near the ridge, a shape moved once, then paused again beneath the trees. Same as before. Still, watching. The air cooled, a dry branch tapped once against the outer fence. Inside the pen, the lion slept, his breathing steady, his back curved against the earth. Beyond the compound, the lioness did not leave. Not yet. She remained in place, facing east, her body silent in the long grass, as the last light passed over her shoulders and slipped beneath the edge of the ridge. The sky was still blue-black when the first movement happened. It was just before dawn, when the horizon was only a suggestion and the air carried the chill of night's last breath. Inside the enclosure, the lion stirred. It wasn't a twitch or a shift in sleep, it was a lift. His front paw unfolded from beneath him and braced softly into the dirt. There was no warning, no sound, just a long, quiet motion. Jonah had arrived early. He stood outside the fence with his notebook half closed, expecting another still morning, another watchful hour. But then he saw it. The lion's head rising, then his shoulders. A slow trembling passed through the hind legs, and for a long moment the body froze in that crouch, between collapse and standing. The lion exhaled. Dust pushed from under his paws, and then, without hesitation, he stood. It wasn't strong. The rise was crooked, wavering. His back legs buckled once beneath him, then caught themselves, but he did not fall. He held himself up, ribs moving with visible effort, tail dragging low in the dirt. Jonah didn't speak. No one approached. The gate to the pen had been left open the night before, not by plan, but by habit. They hadn't expected him to leave. The lion stepped forward once, then again. The movement was deliberate, fragile, and final. Not final as in ending. Final as in chosen. He passed the edge of the shaded post, his shoulder brushing lightly against the old wire. A thin line of dust clung to his side. His paws fell soft into the ground. Each step was placed with care, as if memory had returned to his bones. He did not look back. Beyond the pen, the compound spread open, bordered only by thorn brush and scattered acacia. He moved through it, slow but unbroken, until he reached the open gate. Then he crossed it. No ranger stepped in. No call was made to hold him. They had waited weeks for movement. Now that it came, it belonged to him alone. The lion walked toward the edge of the field, past the last tire track and into the low grass, where the earth dipped gently toward the bush line. And then, from the right, a second shape emerged. She had been waiting again, as she had every morning. The lioness moved forward from the trees, silent. Measured, with the same patience she had shown for days. She did not call. She did not rush to him. She simply followed, several paces behind. Her posture was quiet, eyes fixed ahead. She gave no sign of urgency, just presence. The lion didn't turn to acknowledge her. He kept walking, but he did not falter when she came near. He did not veer from the path. She stayed behind him, not beside, her steps weaving lightly between his fading prints in the dust. The bush swallowed them gently. No leaves cracked, no birds scattered, just two bodies disappearing into a space wide enough for only silence and sun. The rangers watched from the edge, standing still beneath the softening sky. There were no words needed. He had made the decision. His body had answered its own question. The risks had not vanished. He was still thin, still recovering, but he had left on his feet. That meant something unshakable. Jonah lowered his gaze as the brush closed behind them. He didn't reach for the logbook. There was nothing more to record. The wind moved lightly across the compound floor, catching small pieces of bark and lifting the corner of a tarp. A single feather, dislodged from the nesting tree, spun once through the air and landed softly near the empty gate. In the distance, where the land crested beyond the ridge, the grass swayed once, then stilled.